People talk a lot of crap on Dark Souls 2 hitboxes. Nobody has played this game and not screamed, "What? How did that hit me?" But is the game really that jank, or do we all just suck? I took a look at Dark Souls 2 in slow motion, hitboxes on, and the answers I found surprised the hell out of me. In this video, we're going to be building up to the most accused bosses of crappy hitboxes, so by the end of this, you can decide for yourself, are Dark Souls 2 hitboxes really that bad? Before we start, there's one thing that Dark Souls 2 does that no other FromSoft game has done since. It's something that you need to keep in mind as we go through this. In Dark Souls 2, the adaptability, and for some reason also the attunement stat, directly influence how many iframes you have in a roll. You can see from Adam Barker's video the difference a starting class adaptability makes compared to a character with adaptability well leveled. This variance in iframes, which some players don't even know exists, is part of the frustration with the game, but it's not even close to the whole story. First up, the Last Giant. His arm swing hitbox is what you expect, but then it gets to the end of the swing. This is my pet peeve with early FromSoftware, just adding hitboxes on appendages that moved a bit, but definitely are not anticipated to be part of an attack. With this boss fight emphasizing positioning to avoid attacks, it just feels kinda lame to get backhanded out of nowhere. That and this little beauty. When the boss uses its severed arm as a weapon, which is pretty badass, the hit capsule extends well beyond the model and is much thicker than the swings previously. It adds some arbitrary difficulty to his second phase, requiring tighter roll timings without having anything visually to communicate that to the player. But there is some very cool stuff that this boss does, like area of effect attacks that have different effects based on how you get hit. There's the initial stomp attack, but then after it lands, a growing AoE expands from the impact. In action, if you are hit directly under the foot, you get squashed, but if you get hit by the extending blast, you get blown away, taking about half the damage, rewarding you for at least avoiding the initial stomp. The Covetous Demon from Dark Souls 1 has a similar idea, but the AoE appears instantly and doesn't have any kind of special effect. You just take full damage, even well after an otherwise decently timed roll. I've got a whole video covering Dark Souls 1, and you can check that out as well. But essentially, you have a good example of a Dark Souls 2 hitbox actually being significantly more dynamic and intuitive than games in other titles that maybe you hear less complaints about. A win for Dark Souls 2. And what's been a win for me is discovering that clothing for gamers doesn't need to be cringy. We found Project Orochi, which is Japanese-style streetwear with subtle nods to games like Dark Souls, Sekiro, Apex Legends, etc. I've been rocking my Dark Souls shirt, while Babe 2 loves architecture, so she got this intricate Academia Lucaria hoodie. I love that I can actually wear this stuff out and about, and it's like a if you know type style, and isn't all, oh boy, I sure do love gaming type of clothing. They are also pre-shrunk cotton, so it stayed the size we've wanted. These are not junk fast fashion. They have free shipping in the US, and you can use promo code BABE1, BABE2 to get 10% off your order. Check them out if you're interested and you want to support the channel. Back to the video. The Covetous Demon. Kinda just an ugly blob rolling around, not sure how this thing convinced the developers to let him in the game in the first place. No. All right. Overall, this boss is a pushover because you simply walk away from his attacks most of the time. But he does induce panic when his tail is going nuts, looking like it's about to damage you. It can launch you, but very often doesn't have any hit detection on it. So sometimes hit detection isn't where you'd think it would be, but other times he swings an arm attack, but apparently his gingivitis is contagious because his mouth hurts you too. He does have a similar expanding AoE hitbox after his belly flop, kind of fun. So there is some jank stuff with him, and he is a big beefy boy, but people don't realize Dark Souls 2 was more about positioning yourself around a boss's attacks rather than rolling. You can tell by iframes being an optional stat that they didn't design bosses or enemies around a hard expectation of rolling. If a boss like this hits you, you probably should have never been in that position in the first place. You'll notice there are few, if any, massive arena-sized AoE attacks in the entire game that require you to nail a 3-frame window roll in order to avoid certain death. For people who disliked Elden Ring, some saying it felt like a rolling simulator, give Dark Souls 2 a try. You might actually like it. Up next, the Smelter Demon. Holy shit, am I allowed to show that? Oh, try face butthole, am I right? Jesus Christ. All right, enough jokes, I promise. Grow up, I agree. So, the Smelted or Delted Demon. His body is surrounded by an AoE flame big enough that it's just about unavoidable with a melee build. And his jump attack turns his entire body into a ball of death, finishing with this AoE blast, which luckily doesn't stick around for long at all. A final interesting note is his sword features 2 hit detectors, one for his standard sword and one extending even further for the flame. It doesn't line up well in game though, because the flame trails behind the sword during his swing, so the flame hit capsule is nowhere near where the flame visually appears at the end of the weapon. You'll notice the flame reconnects with the sword at the end of the swing. Likely when they designed the character in a separate software, that's the way it looked, but in-game, basically roll way earlier than the flame shows if you're trying to get away from it. Sinh, the Slumbering Dragon. The first thing I noticed about this boss is how his AoE fire breath attacks work. You'll be playing along and then get absolutely tubed by a wall of flame. This kind of attack is actually handled differently by modern FromSoftware. Flame attacks spawn individual hit detectors spaced out, making it a little easier to roll through them or get a little lucky avoiding damage. If you're curious, I have a video covering Elden Ring and its DLC as well, but in Dark Souls 2 though, the dragons are tubed up as well as other bosses in the game. Rolling through them is much trickier, which reinforces positional play being the primary focus when they designed Dark Souls 2. Sinh also has multifaceted AoE attacks like his fire bomb exploding, then expanding the poison out from it. What's kinda odd is he does have stomp style attacks, which weren't given the expanding pushback hitbox, even though you can see the particle effects being there where it would have been. But they are all over his full body swing attack. I guess when you have a giant dragon that can turn its entire body into a hit detector, you give the player a little mercy here or there. But not here though. This is a roll to the side if I've ever seen one. Because if you manage to roll through the flame ball that he's dragging in front of him, a whiff of his little toesies is the last thing you'll smell before his feet hitboxes take off your head. Old Iron King. You fight this guy on a small platform surrounded by certain death. His hand flame attack is the beam of death we've already seen, but his breath flame attacks are actually similar to the future games. But here, they serve a double purpose of distracting idiots. Man, this guy's got hella balls. What's funny though is take notice of this hitbox shape on his fist smash attack. Then take a look at his side swipe with his hand extended. They got a little lazy on this one. They just reused the fist one, which doesn't really line up with the extended hand one. Not that big of a deal, but it is fun to know. In reality, this fight is about just not getting hit into the lava, which is obvious from his two-hand smash having a second AoE blast extending well beyond his initial smashdown attack. Eventually, you do reach his phase 2, which has its own quirks. His one-arm smash flame AoE isn't centered around his arm. You'll notice his arm is barely even in it on the left side. So dodging to the outside of his arm is way more likely to avoid taking damage than the other way. At the same time, his two-arm phase 2 smash, good thing it's well centered because goddamn it is hefty. Luckily, we had cheats on, so we didn't take any damage, popping us up in order to give him a nice goodbye kiss. Before we get to the most misunderstood boss in the entire game, here are some brief honorable mentions that were requested. Also, if you've liked the video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Royal Rat Authority. His arm swing also includes just a chunky ass head hit detector. I mean, good lord, why use a circle instead of a cylinder around his head? Generally speaking, the vibes are much better under his belly, as his feet don't really pose any threat. Except here, good God, I'm convinced Clifford the big red dog would have been put down immediately. What's a little odd is that his front paws have hit detection to the floor, but his back feet, it's way higher up on that higher bone. Works in the player's favor though, because it's a lot less likely you or your summon are gonna be tall enough to, get hit. And lastly, to answer, how close can you get to his vomit attack? I was surprised by this because the special effect of the poison is just multiple circular textures on the floor, but the hit detector is one singular expanding circle. It doesn't exactly match the actual poison on the floor. Sometimes it's farther than the poison, sometimes it's less. It also despawns earlier than the poison SFX does. So how close can you get to the vomit poison attack? Yes. Giant Lord. Just showing this because it's funny to see this big, scary boss attack compared to where we are now. Let me know if you think a mod where you try to beat Elden Ring as a Dark Souls 2 character with the same iframes, healing, clunky movement would be fun. Or hell. Fume Knight is well polished. Everything as expected, but here's two of his most requested attacks visualized. And finally, the boss I see the most accusations of hitbox tomfoolery, the Pursuer. A straightforward guy with sword and shield as the game's opening boss challenge. His sword hitbox is consistent across all his moves, but he also has this circular hit detector on his wrist. You might think, that's bullshit, that's not part of the sword, game sucks. And you'd be right, Dark Souls 2 can suck in a lot of ways, but not for this reason in particular. If there's no hit detector close to the boss's body while they swing, it allows players to just stick to the boss like glue, slipping past attacks. They learned that lesson from Dark Souls 1, and apparently forgot it again, because you can trivialize some boss attacks in titles as recent as Shadow of the Erdtree. Whoops. But here, in Dark Souls 2, a game notorious for having bad hit detection, they actually nailed it here, and with other bosses in the game as well. The Pursuer's shield hit detector is also quite a bit larger than its model appears, like the opposite of the gray sweatpant effect, but I think it's needed for the attack to feel threatening in the combo. His projectiles also have the shape you would expect to how they appear visually, unlike the arrows in this game for some reason. You can literally walk into the tailing hitbox, as it's 3 times the size of the arrow. But we'll cover enemy goofery in another video. Now, the main complaint you see about this boss in particular is his sword grab attack. It has the same hit detection as his weapon, but what confuses people is that if any part of your character model connects with that hit detector, iframes excluded, your character will be placed in the center of the sword, the starting location for this unique grab animation. This works the same with other grabs on similar bosses as well, but it gets particularly silly in clips like this. You'll notice the character's foot is barely clipped by the sword hit detector. The hitbox is placed where it should be and operates as it should, but it sure doesn't look or feel good to play against. A potential solution could be having one hurt box surrounding the player's outer extremities, which if hit, don't trigger a grab, but instead take damage normally, while having the torso hurt box be the trigger for the actual grab animation. This should eliminate any jarring teleportation and would make the start of the stabbed animation better line up with in-game events. So in my opinion, this isn't an issue with the boss hitboxes as much as it's an issue with the character model. If you want to see some real goofy ass hit detectors, look at FromSoft's newest release. They have the grab extending way behind the hand, so you get teleported backwards into it. Dark Souls 2 is not as bad as you think. So the Pursuer gets a lot of shit, but is actually a solidly built boss from a hit detection standpoint, but is plagued by some of the same animation quirks present in essentially every FromSoft title. So overall, I actually found Dark Souls 2 to have more good than bad in its hitboxes by a long shot. I expected to see tons of blatant bullshit in each boss, given how much people reference the hitboxes from the game. This video was just the highlights. I have plenty of footage of bosses' hit detection performing exactly as expected. But let me know if you think there's something that I missed. Also, I want to do a video covering Dark Souls 2 enemies in the future, so leave a comment of which enemies you would want me to cover. Remember, a like and a comment really helps send the video out to people that want to see it, and subscribe to see more. But as always, thanks for watching.